Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the database guy, and we're going to continue with installation of different database systems, and today we're going to talk about Microsoft SQL Server, so let's get right to it. So I have a Windows 11 running here, and notice I have Visual Studio out here on my desktop. Well, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to search for Visual Studio Installer from my Start menu. And from there, I want to install something. I want to install the data tools for Visual Studio. So I'm going to click on Modify from my Visual Studio. And I'm going to scroll on down to Data Storage and Processing. Click on that. And I think, unless you really want to do Azure stuff, you can leave that clicked or you can turn it off. It reduces it down actually quite a bit. It goes from 2 gigabytes down to 742 megabytes. So we're not going to be doing anything with Azure. We're going to be doing things with the SQL Server. So I'm just going to leave everything like that. I'm going to click Modify, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to install that. So let's go ahead and let that install. And then the next thing we're going to do, while that's installing, let's go ahead and download the MySQL Server. Now, MySQL is Microsoft's answer to IBM DB2 and Oracle enterprise level database, relational database management systems, and something you really need to know about. So I went to this Microsoft.com SQL Server downloads link, and one nice thing about Microsoft SQL Server is that it's all GUI installable. I mean, you can do some things with the command line, but I think most Windows users, maybe not administrators, but users, use the GUI. So that's what we're going to do. So we're not going to touch any of these up on top, and I'm going to put these links, by the way, in the description of this video. I'm going to click on the developer. There's also the Express. The Express is like a server that you would use to test the ability to serve data, but the developer also includes additional tools for development, and that's what we're going to download. So I'm going to go ahead and download that, and you can see it downloads very, very quickly. So while the while the Visual Studio is still downloading, let's go ahead and open up the downloads and let's take a look at this SQL 2022 SSE. And this is going to give me an option to either install basic or custom or download media. Now, I would really recommend that you click on the download media, which I'm going to do right now. And it asks me, do I want to download the ISO or the cab? I'm going to download the ISO and just click download. And that's going to take a few minutes to download. The Microsoft servers are pretty quick, so it doesn't take very long. But I would really, wow, is that quickly? Did it download it? Oh my goodness, it did. There's the disk image file right there. So it downloaded it pretty quick. Now, I already had that ISO disk there, so it may not download that quick for you. But anyway, so that's cool. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. My Visual Studio is done, so I'm going to go ahead and close that installation program. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this ISO file. And what it basically does is it mounts it as a drive. And down here it says, what should you do? Well, I'm going to go up and I'm going to just double click on the setup program.— So once the option or once the menu comes up, there's a number of things you can do here. But before I do anything, I'm going to click on this. Let me see, which is the one I want to click on? It doesn't matter. So let's just go ahead and install. Oh, that's down here on installation. So if you're wondering about your version of Windows, you can click on the hardware and software requirements. I'm running Windows 11 in a VMware guest with 8 gigabytes of memory. So it meets those requirements. So I'm going to click on installation. And I can click on new SQL Server installation. I can also install SQL Server management tools. In fact, I'm going to click on that right now. The third one, install the SQL Server management tools. And what that should do is that should bring up a web browser. and I'm going to click on download SSMS. This is the problem with using Azure, Microsoft Edge. It requires you to log in with a user ID. Ugh. So I wish they would knock that off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Control-Alt-Delete. I'm going to go to Task Manager. And I'm actually going to get rid of, I'm going to turn off Edge. And I believe it's also asking me to log in, so I'm going to turn that off as well. Boy, is that irritating. Okay. So I'll put the link directly in there because it always brings up Microsoft Edge. It always requires you to log in. I don't like to log in. So I'm going to click on this new SQL Server standalone installation. And while it's doing that, let's go ahead and get this started. Then we're going to go ahead and download the SSMS. And it's very important to download that. I'm going to select the developer. You could select Express or Evaluation. Evaluation stops working after a little while, and then they want money. The developer has those extra tools, and Express, it has limited database. So I'm going to leave it on the developer and just click Next. I'm going to say I accept, click Next. I'm going to click on Use Microsoft Update to check for product updates. Click Next. Now it should check a bunch of stuff here. So everything looks good. The firewall is not enabled. I'm going to show you how to set that up. So I'm going to click Next. It was just yellow. And I'm going to click on Select All. Why not? And then click Next. Just leave everything else default. Okay, we're going to use the default instance. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. A lot of next clicking in this installation, which is kind of nice, but it also allows you to configure it in a special way. Now, you may want to write down these ports. That's the range of IP ports that is used by the poly-based services. We're not going to use this in this series of videos, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to click Next. It asks me, I'm not sure what it's asked me, how I want it to start up and stuff. I'm going to click on the server agent and say automatic on the startup type. Everything else looks okay. Let's see, on server browser I'm going to click automatic and click Next. What that means is that will those automatically start up when you boot your computer. It asked me if I want Windows authentication mode or mixed mode with Windows authentication. I'm going to leave it on Windows authentication mode. Because if you select this, there's some other things you have to do, and I just like to get the damn thing. I just like to get the darn thing installed, so I'm just going to leave it there and click Next. Let me see, what is it? Oh, so I just clicked Next, and it said, well, you want Windows authentication mode, but what user are you going to use to authenticate with the SQL Server? So I'm going to click Add Current User, and it sits there and it thinks for a little while, and then what it will do is here, it'll put the administrator from the current user that you're logged into, it'll put that into the SQL Server database of administrators, and then you won't have to log in all the time. As long as you're logged into your Windows, it'll automatically log in. There we go. So it put it in there. Now I'm going to click Next. I'm just going to leave this as tabular mode. I have to do the same thing down here. I have to click Add Current User. And this is for the data directories server configuration portion, so it needs to know who's the user that's going to be managing that, and adding current user is the current user logged in. I'm going to click Next. 8391, you may or may not need to know that. It might not be a bad idea to mark it down. And I'm going to say Create New SSL Certificate. Now, for those of you who don't know what the SSL certificate is, the SSL certificate is the Secure Socket Layer certificate that allows you to log into the server securely, and the communications port or the communications tunnel is going to be encrypted. I'm just going to leave everything default, click Next, and now you're going to get a complete list of everything that's going to be installed. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Install, and then it's going to sit there and work for a while. Now, while that's working, let's download the SSMS. So to download the SSMS, let me go grab that URL. And there's actually a couple of things I want to add here. So the best way to find this is I'm just going to do a search on download SSMS. And it seems to always be the very first one. I'm going to click on that, download SSMS, and just click on the free download for SQL Server Management Studio. Now it might ask you for a Microsoft ID. Let's click on it and see. Nope, it didn't. It's going to download it. So that's awesome. So while the server is downloading, you can do that. There's also another thing that you might want to do is you might want to download an example database. And so there's another URL that I'm going to put on the description of this video that I'm just going to go ahead and paste into here. And the example database is kind of neat. It's called the AdventureWorks, and this is the 2022 version of it. So I'm just going to click on the OLTP version, and that's going to download that example database as well. And the example database will be something that we import into our database. The other thing that I like to always install is the dbeaver download because it's a really good GUI for database access. And I'm going to go ahead and download the Windows installer. So those are all the things that you should download. And again, in the description of this video, I will put those download links. So this is still running. We're going to go ahead and let this run for a few minutes, and then we're going to get back to it. Okay, so while this thing is still installing, let's go ahead and set up the firewall. Now, the firewall is a protection so people cannot get into your computer, but you need to open up the firewall port to allow computers from outside to access your Microsoft SQL server. So I'm going to type in defend, and here's your Windows Defender firewall. Now there's a couple of things you can do here. You can just go over and click on Turn Windows Defender Firewall on or off, and you can just turn it off. But the problem with that is now anybody can get into your computer that has a reason to. Now most people don't have to worry about that, but if you're on a server, it's definitely something you want to worry about. However, there's another thing you can do is you can just open up the one port that Microsoft SQL Server uses, and it'll be monitoring that port. So if somebody tries to hack into your computer, they won't be able to on that port. So I'm going to click on Advanced Settings. And from there, I'm going to click on Inbound Rules. I'm going to click on New Rule. I'm going to click Port. Oop, I got two of them. So I'm going to click on Port. Next. There's TCP. I'm going to put 1433 in there. Press Next. Allow the connection. That's fine. And then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this Microsoft SQL Server 1433 Inbound Port. And then I'm going to click Finish. And now you see it right up there. So the next time you bring this Windows Defender Advanced Settings up, it will no longer be at the top. It'll be capitalized. It'll be sorted based on the name. But you can always scroll over here to the right, and you can see that, where's that 1433? You can see that 1433 will be allowed in the firewall. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, close the Defender firewall, and this install is still going. Now, while this install goes, we can install the SSMS. So let's go down here to Downloads, and I'm going to install the SSMS setup. Now this install program uses a different program than the Microsoft SQL Server does, so it's got to verify that the file is not corrupted or something, which is why it's taking so long, and then we'll be able to get to it. Okay, here we go. So it's the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave everything default and just click Install. So that's one nice thing about Microsoft SQL Studio installation, or Microsoft SQL database installation, is you can do multiple things at the same time. So we have to wait for this to finish, and then we've got to actually do some configuration. It's not too bad, but we'll see it. Okay, once the installation is done, you can see our SSMS is still installing. But once this is installed, we're going to go ahead and click close, and then I'm going to close this initial installation. Now it says, was it installed? It installed correctly. I'm not sure why. Probably because it's an older install program. I'm not sure about that. Okay, so I'm going to come down here to my Start menu, and I'm going to go to All Apps, and I'm going to scroll down to Microsoft SQL Server. There it is right there. And I'm going to take the Configuration Manager, and I'm going to right-click on it, More, and I'm going to say Open File Location. Now you're going to see why I'm doing this. And I'm going to hold down my right mouse button, and I'm just going to drag it to the desktop and say Create Shortcut here. And that makes it really easy to get to. We're going to do the same thing with the SSMS as soon as it's done installing. This way we don't have to go looking for it all the time. It's always on our desktop. So what we need to do is we need to set up the server. We need to configure the server to be TCP/IP enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click on that. I'm going to go down here to SQL Server Network Configuration. I'm going to click on Protocols. Notice that TCP/IP is disabled. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to enable it. I'm going to click Apply and OK. Now it told me that the server had to be restarted for it to take that into account. So I'm going to right click on that, and actually I'm on server services. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to say, oh, where's the restart? Click on SQL Server Services, and then I'm going to go over here to my server, SQL Server. I'm going to right click on that. I'm going to click Restart, and now it's restarting the server. Whenever you make a change to the protocols or the communication methods, you always have to restart it. You can't restart it from over here on the left because that is categories of services. These are all the services right here. Okay, our SSMS is still not completed yet, so it's setting up some things. We did the firewall. The next thing we're going to do is install the example database, but before we do that, we have to wait for SSMS to finish up. And you can see that under the SQL Server Services, everything is running, everything was good. The status is good, so that's awesome. So I'm just going to minimize this. And now it says that you have to have a restart in order to complete the setup, which I think is kind of strange. I've never seen that happen before. So let's go ahead and close up my management console, and I'm going to go ahead and restart this computer, and then we'll continue after that. Okay, so I've restarted this operating system. I'm going to bring up the configuration manager to make sure that the server is up and running, and so it's getting the data. It looks like things are still starting up, and you can see things are beginning to start running. So you might want to wait for a couple of seconds. So I don't see things changing, so I'm going to go over here to the server, and I'm going to right click and say start, and let's see if that starts up. It should start up automatically. I'm not sure why. I've never seen this happen before. It's always pretty good. Okay, so it shows that it's running. I'm going to click on each one of these, and I'm going to say start, start, start. Again, I'm not sure why, unless it's just taking longer. But you shouldn't have to do this. Now, if you try to start and it shows that it stays stopped, then there's a problem. I'm not sure what's going on here. But let's go ahead and start at the SMS. So I'm going to go down here to the start. I'm going to go to all apps, and I'm going to scroll back down to Microsoft SQL Server Tools, and I'm going to say the same thing here: Server Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio 19. I'm going to right-click on that, More, Open File Location. I'm just going to hold down my right mouse button, drag it to the desktop, say Create Shortcut there. And now I'm going to start up this. Now, this is where you're going to be able to connect to your server to make sure that it's running. We're even going to go ahead and install the example database using this. Okay, so it asked me if I want to connect. I'm going to go ahead and just click on Connect here. And then over here on the left, we're going to expand databases, system databases, master, tables. So it looks like the server's up and running. Not sure why it didn't start automatically, but we can see that it's up and running now. Okay, so with that open, let's go ahead and install the example database. And I remember earlier in this video, I showed you how to download that example database. And I'm going to go down to downloads. Now, this is kind of interesting how you have to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this PC. I'm going to go to my C drive. I'm going to go down to Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server. I'm going to go to the MSAS. Actually, I want to do the MS SQL. So I'm going to go to the MS SQL. I'm going to go to MS SQL. I'm going to go to Backup. Continue. Yes, I want to do that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this AdventureWorks file. I'm going to copy it to that folder. Kind of weird that you have to do this, but this is how you do it. And then I'm going to go up, and so now I'm going to go up into databases. So I'm going to right click on databases, and I'm going to click on Restore Database. I'm going to come down here to Device, and I'm going to click the little ellipse button. I'm going to click Add, and there's my AdventureWorks 2022 file that I just copied in there. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to say OK. And it's going to import it. It should say database restored successfully. Now you should be able to see, if I go into databases, you should be able to see the AdventureWorks. I'm going to expand that. I'm going to go into tables. I'm going to go down here to person.person. I'm actually going to right click on it, and I'm going to say select top 1,000 rows, and you should see all the data there. So there you go. Here's the actual SQL statement that showed that executed on the server, and you can actually now see the actual data. Now there's something else that you want to do here. Windows authentication means that you have to be logged into Windows to get to that database server. Well, what if you're on something like Linux, or you're on a Mac and you want to be able to get to it using dbeaver, right? How do you do that? Well, to do that, you need to add a user that doesn't have any spaces in the name, and that is authenticated via SQL Server, not the operating system. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to right click on my database, and I'm going to go to Properties. From Properties, I'm going to go to Security, and I'm going to click on SQL Server and Window Authentication Mode. That allows me to log in outside of Microsoft Windows and login, but also my Windows login as well. So you can do both. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Some of the configuration until you restart it. So I'm going to click on the server, and I'm going to click on Restart. So we're going to go ahead and let the server restart because I made that communication change. Yes, I want to restart it. Yes. So it has to stop it, which means it logs anybody off that's on it, and then it restarts it. And it looks like it completed. Okay, great. So now what we have to do is we have to add this user that is authenticated through SQL Server that might be on the outside. So the way that you do that is you have to create two IDs. You have to create a login ID, and then you have to create a database ID. Kind of strange, but that's how they did it. So I'm going to expand security. Notice I'm not inside of any database. I'm just in the main server security. I'm going to click on logins, and you can see all the logins there. I'm going to right click on logins and say new login. Now we want to make this simple, so I'm going to click on SQL Server Authentication, and the login name will be, I don't know, guest user. And the password I'm going to just make password. And I'm going to turn off enforce password policy. Now the default database, I'm going to drop that down, and I'm going to pick this AdventureWorks that I just imported, and then I'm going to click OK. So now when the guest user logs into the server, they're only allowed to access the AdventureWorks database. So now we have to tell the AdventureWorks database what kind of authority this user should have. So I'm going to go into databases now. I'm going to expand AdventureWorks, and I'm going to click on security. There's users. I'm going to right click on users, and I'm going to say new user. And I'm going to say the new user. I'm just going to use the same username. So guest user. Actually, I could call it, yeah, I'm just going to call them both guest user. Just keep it simple. And click OK. So now that we have the guest user, now we have to tell the database what data in this database should that user have access to. So to do that, I'm going to double click on guest user. I'm going to go to securables, and I'm going to click search, and I'm going to click all objects belonging to the person schema. Now a schema is a group of tables inside of the database. So it has, the schema is like the prefix name dot table name. So I'm going to click on person and click OK. And let's say we want guest user to have access to the person table. So I'm going to click on that, and I only want them to do data selects. I only want them to be able to grab data from that table. Let's find another one. Maybe the person phone number. We'll do selects. What else? I think there was an email address thing, so we're going to click on that. And person addresses. Okay, so you select all the tables and how you want. Now you can allow them to do inserts to the table, delete. You can have them control the table, alter the tables. You don't want to do that unless the user is really a developer, really knows what they're doing, or maybe even a database administrator. So go ahead and click OK. And that's basically it. Now you have just given that user, you've just made that user available and given that user the ability to log into the server. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install dbeaver, and this is the Windows version. And just go ahead and pretty much take all of the defaults. And I'll show you how to connect as if you were outside of this Windows computer. And it's always good to do this as well, just to make absolutely sure that everything is set up okay. Now, if you're going to, I like to create shortcut on the desktop. Okay. So now if you're going to be doing this from outside, you have to know the IP address of your computer. So I'm going to go down to search. I'm going to type CMD and press enter. I'm going to type ipconfig. So you actually want to write down this IP address. Now, if your server has a host name like, Google.com or Costco.com or something else, you can use that. However, if you're on a VMware guest operating system like I am, you need that IP address. So write that IP address down. I'm going to leave it up there because we're going to use that. And I'm going to double click on dbeaver. Allow access. I like to always create the sample database and not to send anonymous data. Okay, so I'm going to click on this little add database connection, and I'm going to go up here, I'm going to type Microsoft, and there's my SQL Server icon. I'm going to click next. Now I have to put in a host, so I want to put in this IP address. So host is going to be 172.16.63.129. Now I could have just put in local host there because I'm on the local computer, but I want to show you how to do it if you're outside of the server operating system. And I want to do SQL Server authentication. Now, if you come down here and you click Windows authentication, it's not going to allow you to, well, it would allow you to log into guest user only if guest user had a Windows ID, but it doesn't. We created guest user as an SQL Server only ID. So we're going to leave it as SQL Server authentication, guest user, password. I like to always click on both of these, show all schemas and trust server connection, and click test connection. It's going to ask you to download the Microsoft SQL Server drivers, and then you should get a really nice dialog here that says connected. So I'm going to click OK, then I'm going to click finish. Now the name is kind of funky, so I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say edit connection, and I'm going to go over here to general, and I'm going to change this to Microsoft SQL Server guest user login. There we go. I'm going to expand it. Databases. Here's my AdventureWorks. Schemas. And person. And what tables do I have access to? I only have access to the tables that I allowed select authority on. So I'm going to click on person. I'm going to right click and say view data. And now I'm looking at the data on the Microsoft SQL Server. There you go. So you've got your Microsoft SQL installed. You've got your dbeaver. You're going to be using this SSMS quite a bit because it's kind of the same as dbeaver, but it looks like it's a really good tool to have. You can manage your server. I would reboot the computer and make sure those services start up automatically. Maybe I wasn't waiting long enough. I'm not sure. But you want to make absolutely sure that's the case. And we also went over how to set up the firewall to allow outside connections to come in. You're all set to start your database administration and even programming in Microsoft SQL Server. See you at the next video.